Hello, it's Graham here from POCGamer, and I am here today to take you all through a crash course on world building. That's right, for the next hour, I'm going to be talking to you and then answering some questions about world building for RPGs, stories, whatever you happen to need these skills for. This is a modified version of the workshop that I ran at OrcaCon this year, and I am here on Chromatic Chimera's channel for CouchCon to do it again. And just before I kick off, I'd like to remind everybody to please hit that donate button at the bottom of the screen where this is all going towards Doctors Without Borders. And they're doing a lot of work right now in a lot of developing places and a lot of places that are having problems getting medical attention with the pandemic going on. So please donate to that. And please remember to hit the virtual vendor hall. There's a lot of artists out there, a lot of creatives who this is their sole form of income. So if you can help them out by picking something up online, that would be fantastic. All right. So world building. It is easily one of the most rewarding and fun things that you can do as a game master or as a DM or referee, whatever you want to call it, storyteller. But it can be challenging. There can be speed bumps, all sorts of stuff like that. And so we're just going to talk today about some of the ways that you can approach world building and some of the things to remember about it that'll make it easier for you. So the first, there's three big questions I hear a lot about world building, and I'm going to cover those first. The first one is, do I have to create a whole world at once? The answer is no. Unless you have a lot of time that you can just blow on getting all this stuff done. You don't have to create a whole world at once. You can create a core area and then sort of skeletonize things as they go out from it, and that will save you a lot of time and effort because you only really need to know what's happening around the immediate area, and then have an idea about what's going on around that area. So you don't have to create a whole world at once. If you want to go that route, absolutely do it. But it's not required in any way, shape, or form. The next question: do I have to include everything in my world? There are a lot of the most popular baseline game worlds out there. Things like Goralion in the Pathfinder series, or Forgotten Realms, or Greyhawk for Dungeons and Dragons. These are what some people call kitchen sink worlds. It's where just everything just keeps getting poured in without regard for rhyme or reason or logic or carrying capacity of the land, anything. And you don't have to do that. You can build the world the way you want it. You can build the world the way your players like it. You guys can meet in the middle. You can include as much or as little as you want. There's nothing that requires you to put absolutely everything that's available into your world. And the final question I hear a lot is, what makes a good world? And there's a three-part answer to that one, at least to me, and that is continuity. Continuity is important because it frames up how things are working inside your world. And when you have discordant continuity or suddenly giant gaps and things like that, it can cause problems. And so having a decent continuity is important. The next one is reliable world mechanics. And I don't say that because I like worlds to be boring. I say that because a reliable mechanics, it gives all the players a baseline from which to deviate from. And the other thing is that it makes it so that when those reliable mechanics are broken, it's that much more shocking and surprising to the players themselves. So they're like, what, how, like, what's happening? What's going on? And it helps build up suspense and, a sense of excitement, all that sort of good stuff. So and then the final part is fun, just pure, unadulterated fun. That is an important feature to have in game. And if your world's not fun for you, and if it's not fun for your players, then you're going to run into issues with immersion. You're not going to want to work on the world as much or put much effort into it because you're not having fun. So the world has to be an enjoyable place for not just you as the creator, but for the people that are adventuring in it or experiencing it. So those are the big questions that I sort of hear a lot of. So got those covered off right off the hop there. Um, Now, moving into actual world building. So, um, the first thing I'll sort of talk about is, and this is bridges a little bit into tomorrow's talk, where I'm going to be talking about mapping to your needs, and that's um, scope your worlds by both the need and design that you have for them in terms of size and composition. Like if you're just running a really sort of localized adventure that's happening in a relatively small area, you don't need to go bananas and build up an entire Jupiter-sized world covered in everything if all that's being used is one small area. Um, Likewise, you don't have to pour a ton of detail into the interstitial spaces between locations if you're not big on doing random encounters or things like that. So scope your writing by what you think you're actually going to be needing. Um, let's see what else we got going on here. Shapes and concepts. So your world does not have to be an oblate spheroid, or sorry, an oblate spheroid. Um, it doesn't have to be a regular planet. It doesn't even have to be a globe. It could be a disc. It can be a plane. It could be islands floating in, an ethereal nothingness. There's no limit to to the shapes and stuff that you can choose for your world, as long as it matches what you guys are looking to do. Um, the next thing in world design is break from reality. If you're not playing in a mythic Earth based game, or if you're not playing in a contemporary game or 15 minutes into the future, that sort of thing, the real world is not going to be your best guide for how things develop, how technology and everything else sort of like that progresses. And that's because the less real a world is, or like less attached to the real world a place is, the less likely it is to perfectly follow, our technological and societal developments. And an example I give of that is if you have a world where magic and alchemy work, that's going to radically change how medicine develops. It's going to change how technology develops because magic is now a resource that can be utilized. Alchemy means that you can circumvent many of the regular laws of chemistry, physics, and nature. So things are going to be different, and I say to embrace that difference because if you don't embrace it, it opens things up for issues with immersion, and it can also cause problems with how your players interact with the world because if they're continuously trying to interact with it as if it were sort of a normal world but with magic and monsters and alchemy, they might not get the full suite of capability out of it that you've provided in your writing. So just embrace those differences. And the last part is ask yourself, are you doing a sandbox or a curated experience? And the best way that I can describe that is, in terms that like a lot of people will immediately grasp, is are you playing the equivalent of like Grand Theft Auto 5 online, where your characters are basically, or your players are making their own fun, going around and doing stuff and maybe loosely following a plot line or concept that you throw out every so often? Okay. Or are you running a module style campaign? Like, are you running something like the Storm King's Thunder or, you know, uh, Baldur's Gate Descent to Avernus or something like that, which is more of a curated experience, because there's set components to it. The players are expected as part of the contract at the table that they're going to be pursuing the vague goals of the adventure. So you need to ask yourself that before you set out to do your world building, because that's going to affect that scope and scope I need and design that I talked about earlier. So moving on from there, let's get into peopling your world. So the population distribution. Um, Follow your focus. Like if your focus is on a small area with a limited number of groups who are all interacting in different ways, follow that. If you are running like a giant gonzo rift style kitchen sink, like there's everything everywhere, find what you think is cool and roll with that. Go with that too. Hey, or anything in between. The main point is to take into account all those things when you're doing your work and you're writing everything down. Um, Decolonize your world. Hey, give everyone a chance to be fantastic. There tends to be a tendency in a lot of writers where they'll try to get something right. Like they'll say, I'm basing this group off of X culture in the real world. I'm going to research the heck out of that culture, take all the notes, write everything down. It's going to be amazing. And then I'm going to like put that research effort that I've put into the game. It's going to be fantastic. It often is not. It often leads to a situation where you have a researched out group that is effectively a real world analog that is dropped into a fantasy world that isn't fantastic. A good example of that is the Mazdakans and Mazdaka. They were a heavily researched out group. Like as you read through it, you can say, okay, these ones are supposed to be Incas, these are supposed to be Aztecs, these are supposed to be Mayans. You can see it all the coding just leaps out at you if you know what you're looking at. And they aren't fantastic though, because they're basically those groups, but with their mythic earth sort of levels of magic and ability and stuff like that, which puts them way below everybody else. Like for some reason, they never figured out how to cast fireball. They never figured out any high magic. They never did anything. They just sort of hung around creating sort of low grade magical items and waiting to get rolled over by the European coded group who had firearms, fireballs, and everything else like that. So give everybody a chance in your game to be fantastic, even if they're fantastic in their own way or a unique way. Do that. And the other thing to bear in mind, and this is coming from the sort of the geography background and an anthropology background, and that's pay attention to the carrying capacity and biomes of your world. And carrying capacity is the ability of the land to actually support all the creatures on it. And there's lots of examples of things where like there's this like giant mega city. Oh, hello there, Mr. Puddins. How's it going? There's all sorts of examples where there's like a giant mega city in the middle of a desert, and you're like, how? Like, where's their everything coming from? And like, oh, well, they're highly isolationist. They don't trade with anyone. Like, how are they alive? And it's things like that where it's fine as long as everybody is suspending disbelief. But the moment one person starts to ask questions, all of a sudden everyone starts asking questions. And I got a question: did someone here say geography? Yes, I said geography. Um, all of a sudden everyone's asking questions, and they're saying like, well, if this is a desert, how are people, where's the water for this 1.2 million people coming from? Where's their food coming from? And as the DM, you're just like, look, like you just accept it, this is just how it is. And sometimes that works, other times it can take the tone of your game from like maybe like you were playing a serious game or a mystery or something like that, and all of a sudden it becomes a comedy because your players are having too much fun now poking holes in your world building efforts to stick to the original plan or plot, which can work. Like if you can roll with that, go for it. But I prefer to try to avoid that situation. um, Next up is cultural mechanics. So what I mean by cultural mechanics is um, how are the peoples of your world interacting with each other and the world that they're in? Um, like, do they get along? Do different groups get along together? Or do you have different subcultures of different groups? Do is everyone just a giant monolithic culture where everybody's the same? Like, all those sorts of things. This is where this comes in. And what I'll say here is that one of the things to do here, and this is one of the few places where I'll say it's go one or the other, and that is either have everyone as a monolith or nobody as a monolith, because otherwise it just gets really messy really fast. Okay, like if you have for some reason all the humans on your world are of one culture, fine, just have them of that one culture. Um, because things get very trite very quickly when you have one group, typically humans, because we're human and we like to write ourselves as being awesome. We'll have tons of different cultures and differences and all sorts of things like that in the game. But the elves, dwarves, gnomes, and everything else are, even though they're separated by hundreds, if not thousands, of kilometers of space, and have had thousands of years of independent cultural development, are identical in every location, um, somehow. So it's either give everybody something or give nobody anything, um, because it's going to your game will work more smoothly one way or the other. Um, it's either going to be really cool and diverse and with lots of stuff going on, or you're like, okay, yeah, this is sort of a weird, vague monoculture that everybody has. Just roll with it, call it a day. Um, Next thing here is cultural exchange. So, cultural exchange is different from cultural appropriation. Cultural exchange is where you have two different cultures living in proximity to each other, and you essentially get some light bleed over between the two of them. Um, styles of clothing, styles of warfare, tools, art, language, all that sort of stuff, all sort of exchange. And it's never 100%. And what usually happens is ideas will hit different groups and they'll think, pardon me, they'll be like, okay, well, this is interesting. We like this. We're going to adopt this. And what doesn't tend to get exchanged as much are things that are sacred or that have deep meaning to the cultures, because those things are seen, sort of as being sacred and special, and don't get that occurrence with cultural exchange until you start getting into things like the spread of religions and things like that. Now, how that differs from cultural appropriation is simply where one population sees what another population is doing, and then regardless of that activity's importance or value to said culture, the observing one just takes it and then replicates it, yeah, without regard. And that can cause problems, friction, and conflict, as very much as we see in the modern day. And the last thing I'll talk about briefly here is dominant populations, dominant cultures, non-dominant cultures, and subcultures. So a dominant population is typically the dominant culture, but they're dominant here doesn't mean largest. It just means they're the group that is effectively in charge or benefits the most from the setup that is there. A good example of this dynamic, in effect, would be apartheid era South Africa, where you had a white minority that was both the dominant population and the dominant culture in the area. Um, Non-dominant cultures are all the cultures that exist in a population that are not members of the dominant culture. And subcultures are kind of fun. The subcultures are cultures within the cultures, that are usually focused on some aspect of that culture or some activity or something like that, that makes them unique or different in some way, shape, or form. Um, and it's like an example we were given was sports super fans are a subculture. Um, like goths are a subculture. Um, what's it? Punk fans are a subculture. All those things are subcultures that are part of, either a dominant or non-dominant culture, but they have their own thing going on that they're really focused on and they really enjoy. And those can be some intense fun to inject into. Like, you don't see a lot of that in games, but you can really have a lot of fun with tossing subcultures into your world build, especially around things like sports, festivals, strange activities, all sorts of stuff like that. Um, because the minute you mix that in, all of a sudden your world becomes a little bit more alive because it gives people something they can not necessarily directly relate to, but it's something they can identify as like, oh, okay, like the whole remember the people back in that village, they were huge into playing, whatever the equivalent of football in your world is. And in this one, they're all about dinosaur racing. And so it gives things for people to remember about the places that they've been to. So moving on from people, I'm just going to pause here to remind everybody to, hey, please donate to Doctors Without Borders. I'm not going to say the French name because I'm prohibited from speaking French in the house because of my abhorrent accent. But please donate to them. They're doing a lot of good work right now with this pandemic. So hit that link below. And again, please remember, hit that vendor hall when you're done this, or if you're bored of hearing me talk, just head over there right now and buy something, help some creatives out because right now, times are tough and we got to band together. So back to world building, monster use. I like to put a separation, and when I'm talking about world building, between monster and monster folk. The difference being monsters are monsters, and monsters they don't necessarily have to be unthinking, but they are monsters. They're not building homes. Well, some have homes, like layers and so on. But they're not building cultures. They're not doing things. They are environmental hazards, and things like the Hydra, griffins, oozes, all those sorts of things. And then there's monster folk, and these are groups that are they're monsters ostensibly because that's what they're labeled as in so many books, but they have cultures, they have languages, they're building communities, they're doing all that sort of stuff. And I like to draw a division between them because monsters can be scattered around, and I'll talk about this in a minute, to be hazards for the players. Monster folk, on the other hand, offer more opportunities because they're people, they have cultures, they're thinking, intelligent, all that sort of stuff. So include them when you're building your world, because like if you look at a lot of world maps, you'll see all the human nations mapped out on them. Then maybe you'll see some notes for the non-human, but familiar groups. I'm going to pick on fantasy here. You'll see like elves and dwarves and stuff will have, this is the elf wood, that's dwarf mountain, all that sort of stuff. But include the monster folk. Like if there's an area that is dominated by hobgoblins, have it on your map. How are they interacting with other groups? What's going on with them? If you've got plains where gnolls are roaming and there's, like elephant folk and all that sort of stuff, talk about that. How are they interacting? Do they claim that territory? Are they in conflict with different groups who are trying to maybe claim that territory from them? These are all things that open doors up. It's adding more to your game's potential, um, to do more and offer more to not only you as a DM for things for you to do, but more for your players because it opens up more ways for them to interact with things. So next part of this is making each region different. And this just makes things better. Because if you've ever looked at if you ever looked at a book that has random encounter tables, they're identical. Every forest, every temperate forest in the world has exactly the same monsters in it. Every swamp has the same monsters, and every underwater area is the same. Everything is the same. That's boring. And like that's the sort of thing that breeds complacency and boredom in the party, because they're going through like, okay, guys, we're level 6 now. We're probably going to encounter this or this or this. Let's go. We'll see what happens today. So each region can be different. Like pick a few apex predators. Not everything can be apex. Remember that. Like not everything can be an apex predator. But pick some monsters out. Pick some monster folk out. Pick some hazards out. All that sort of stuff, and build each region differently. And it doesn't have to be themed. And there's a difference here between different like regional differences and theming. Theming is where you decide an area is going to be dragon centric. So you have all the dragon related things there, from threat level like nil to wow, we need to be a god to defeat this. And the entire um, biological setup, not biological, ecological setup of the place is based around dragons. That's theming. Or if you fill a tomb with different types of undead and all that sort of stuff, again, theming. What's not theming is if you say pick 6 or 7 different types of monster and say, okay, these monsters are native to this part of the world. And then pick a different group and say these ones are native to this part of the world. And you build your own little random encounter table. You build your own sort of adventures around what's there. And all of a sudden, now your world is no longer samey. Now your players will remember, okay, like last time we went through here, we ran into like dragons and a few other things. But when we were over there, we ran into those worms and those weird flying things that like bit the heck out of Joe. So you need to doing that, making each area different. It's a little bit of work, but the net result is that things are better. And the best part about it is that there's been so much fantastic work done by so many people in both canonical and official materials and non-canonical unofficial materials, that you can draw on so much stuff. You don't even have to stat all the monsters out. Like you can just go through, find what you like, and then put it together and come up with your own little bizarre food web for how everything works. And last thing is, as I mentioned before, not everything can be an apex predator. Balance out your biomes. It's like if you filled a biome with apex predators, it is going to be a nightmare for literally everything in it. So, like, do that if you hate your players and you feel they need to learn a lesson for something they did. I don't know, but I recommend like build sort of a little food web ecological model and fill in different gaps, because that way things will flow a little easier. Now the next thing I'm going to talk about is pantheons. So pantheon design and how to go about approaching this, because it can be fairly complex, especially if you're trying out like trying to build your own, or if you've encountered something in the game itself and you're like, okay, this didn't really work. How can I work with this? Or do I have to include everything? So the first thing is make a consistent cosmological model. And I say that because an inconsistent cosmological model opens up a world to a lot of strife, um, if your players decide to push it towards that. And what I mean by that is that if you have, say, one part of your world has deities that are in a symbiotic relationship with their worshippers, where the number of worshippers they have and the quality of their faith determines the power of those deities. And then next door, you have a set of deities who have no restrictions like that. Like they have all their powers, but don't require any significant worship or anything else like that. Then you're going to run into problems because what's stopping those, like, in the event of conflict, as those groups fight through, as group B fights through group A's deities are going to be losing power the entire time, becoming less and less able to do things, take action, all that sort of stuff. Um, and meanwhile, the deities who don't require worship from their followers are continuing just to rock and roll and carry on as if everything were normal. Um, so there's that issue. And then there's other issues around like afterlives and stuff like that. And where a lot of this sort of trouble comes from is the attempt to recreate real world religious factionalization, for lack of a better term, at least off the top of my head, and put it into a fantasy setting. Because in the real world, we have no, um, get myself a little bit of trouble here, but we have no concrete proof of afterlife. We have no concrete proof of the existence of different deities, all that sort of stuff. And in many fantasy worlds, it is the opposite case. They absolutely know that there is divine power. They can see it. They can feel it when someone casts a healing spell on them. Um, like deities can even manifest send demigods, all sorts of stuff like that. So it's a very different world. And in the real world, there's multiple concepts of the afterlife. There are, you know, like, I don't know, there's Valhalla, Elysium, the Buddha lands, heaven, hell, all sorts of different underworlds, some of which are super nice, some of which are super awful. And the sort of in fantasy, they try to recreate all of this, but it ends up becoming a bit of a mess because then you're asking, okay, well, who's in charge of what area? What happens if group X isn't, dies outside? What happens if they die outside their network? Um, which was actually touched on in a Forgotten Realms novel years ago, The Ring of Winter, where a worshiper of Mistra dies in Chult, and at that point in the game, Chult was under 100% control of Obteo, and so if you died there, you had to go through his afterlife tests, which of course this dead magic user had no idea what he was talking about, and so this character ended up becoming stuck in a diplomatic feud between Mistra and Obteo because he died out of network and was being, 1 minute Mistra would be trying to take him because he was a devout worshiper and put him into magic user heaven. And then a few minutes later, Obteo would snap him back and throw him back to the world as a ghost because he failed his tests. And if you failed Obteo's tests, you got sent back as a form of undead. So um, having a consistent cosmological model is important. Even if you choose to make it, like different components, figure out how those components are all meshing together and working, because that will make things for your players more easily understandable and will also make your life easier in the long run when you need to figure out what's happened because your players have, I don't know, like played several different pantheons off against each other. Now the next part is the planes. Yes, no, maybe. There's, and this is a D&D centric thing. D&D is huge on, there's the inner planes, the outer planes. There's the heavens, the hells. There's the abyss, all sorts of stuff. Pardon me. There we go. So there's all that stuff going on. And do you have to include all of it? And the answer is no, you don't. You don't have to include the hells. You don't have to include the abyss. You don't have to include anything that you don't want to include in your game or in your world build. Hey, like if it doesn't make sense to have an astral plane in your world, then there doesn't have to be an astral plane. If you're building a world that's rooted hard in the elemental planes, then yeah, have those on there. Does that mean that you have to include the abyss and everything else? No, no, it does not. So just sort of like pay attention to those, not pay attention to, but consider those things when you're doing your building and when you're doing your design. Next thing here with Pantheon design is active versus passive deities. Now, what this means is, are the gods of your world active or are they passive? And to be honest, they cannot be both at once. And I say that because active deities will almost always expand or want to expand generally. And passive deities just aren't interested in what's going on. And if you've mixed up symbiotic relationships with non-symbiotic relationships in your pantheons, it gets even more likely to cause conflict because active deities are more likely to be involved in like a symbiotic relationship with their followers, which means that they need to be active, they need to be doing things, which means that they're going to be constantly drawing more and more followers because they're, who's going to be more important to the village? A priest that shows up and is just like, hey, what's up? I'm a priest. Follow my God. They may or may not do something to you versus, someone who shows up is like, hey, I'm a cleric. I will cast heal magic on you and help make the crops grow better. One of those two people is going to be valued more than the other. And so that's something to think about. And building on that with the final point is the relationship dynamics with worshipers. And this is where things often get really messy because, for example, evil deities are almost always displayed as being super powerful, and that works in a world where there's no symbiotic relationship with the worshipers, because the god of murder who demands that you kill somebody every fourth day to maintain their favor is not going to have the same popularity as, say, the sun god or sun goddess or the deity of um agriculture or something like that. And so you don't need to I recommend that you look into those relationship dynamics and consider like how they're going to work and affect your world. So now we're coming on to system effects. So this is a little bit more crunchy, a little bit more mechanical. I'm not going to get into any math strictly because I play RPGs to have fun, not to do complex math. But it's important to think about when you're doing your world build is how game systems are going to affect the world that get designed to be used with them. Um, every almost every role-playing game out there these days has some boilerplate comment in it somewhere that says, hey, if you don't like the rules or if the rules are getting in the way of your fun, forget those rules, drop them, just keep on having fun, blah, 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 blah. But the fact of the matter is that every single RPG out there has a set of rules that more or less governs and guides how the end users, so your game masters, DMs, storytellers, players, all that sort of stuff, are going to interact with things in the game, and the mechanics send specific messages about, pardon me, what the game considers to be or what is considered to be important in that game. So for example, there you go. So for example, Dungeons and Dragons is a game that is very much still focused on combat. I know there's tons of people who out there who argue against it, but its default setting is still very much a squad based tactical war game. You have different characters playing different roles. You go through an adventure, engage in combat. Combat gives you experience. Experience lets you level up. Your leveling up increases your combat capability, or your increases your capability to participate in the game in the role that you are playing through your class. Um, and that is a game changer. I mean, it has a level based matrix for a level based threat matrix for what's going on. So there's certain stories that are exceedingly difficult to tell with Dungeons and Dragons. For example, many stories out of mythology can't be told using the D&D's rules as read, because the level 1 adventurer who's just left town with his dad's sword is not going to be able to defeat the dragon, without some serious like DM complicity and a whole whack other stuff, because the game's not designed for that. But if you go to other games, let's see here, what's a good example? For example, if you go to games like Fate, or Fate Accelerated, things are different now. It's using a different set of mechanics. It is a different way for you to interact with the world. If you go to the old World of Darkness or the new World of Darkness or whatever they're on now, again, different ways to interact with the world, different ways to experience, different ways to develop your character. And so the main point that I'm trying to get at here is that when you set out to design your world, make sure you're familiar with the rules of the game that you want to apply to that world, or that you want that world to apply to. Because if you make an amazing world for, say, I don't know, I'm looking off to the side, I'm looking at my RPG shelf here. So I don't know. Let's see here. What's a good example? So, say you're playing Traveler and you make an amazing world to adventure on with Traveler, which is a sci fi game. But then you decide, you know what? I want to try playing this, but I want to use Starfinder instead. Starfinder and Traveler are very different games, different mechanics, different systems, different approaches, and it will affect how your world works, and will either lead to issues or a ton of homework on your part as you try to mitigate the effects of the system difference. And at this point, it's where I have to say, remember, it is okay to play using a different system. I know that it can be hard. People love the games and systems that they're using, and often it's difficult to get people to try something new. But make the effort. Be like, hey, look, everyone, I've been making this world. It's really cool. I don't think it's going to work as well with the game that we're using right now, whether it be Call of Cthulhu, D&D, Traveler, whatever. I think it'll work better with this system. Can we try it out? And describe your world a bit, get try to establish that buy-in, and then go forwards. Okay, but just remember, not every system can do everything, as well as a system that may be better designed to do those sorts of things. And I'm just going to pause here for a moment before going into tools of communication, to please again smash that donate button below. We're closing in on $1,000 now for donations towards Doctors Without Borders. They are doing a lot of work right now in places that do not have well-developed medical facilities, and so any donation is appreciated. Like if it's a dollar, fantastic. If it's like $5, awesome. Top donation was $150. I don't know who did that, but that's outstanding. Like that's great. So please hit that donate link and donate. to Doctors Without Borders. And please, there's that virtual vendor hall. Hit it, check it out, see what's going on, and if you can, buy something. There's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of creators out there who are, like they're facing a lot of extra stress right now because the cons aren't happening and they're not able to make it out to everything. So, this is, so this is a lifeline for them. So please, go check that out. And just got my 15-minute reminder. Nice. All right. So I'm gonna go. I probably got about like another like 5 to 10 minutes worth of actual information, and then if you have any questions, I've got the Twitch stream up. I can see all the I can see the comments and everything else like that. If you have any questions about world building, please start firing those up, and I will absolutely try to answer as many of them as possible in the last little bit of um, this workshop. So, tools and communication. So, yeah, one of the biggest things, and I cannot stress this enough, if you're world building, it doesn't matter if you're doing a plug and play world build where you're just taking pre existing components, jamming them together, and making it work, or if you doing a completely original um, world build where you've like sat down, you've figured everything out from like the tidal charts to the to like how far the moons are away from the planet, all that sort of stuff. Okay. You need to communicate with your players. Okay. Are you using a regular campaign setting, but you've made a few changes? Communicate those changes. And the reason that that is so important is that if you don't communicate those changes, okay, number one, you're going to have lower immersion with your players. Okay. Because they're not sure what to trust. Okay? If all they have is like notes from what they're encountering in the game, so they have like no knowledge of your world whatsoever except for what they're encountering, or if they're drawing on resources available because you've modified Forgotten Realms or you've modified Goralion or something like that, um they're they're running off that, but then you've made significant changes to an area and it just messes everything up. It causes problems. So you need to communicate to your players what changes you've made. And if you haven't made changes, you've created something out of whole cloth, you need to communicate that out as well. And there's a ton of great ways to do that because we're living in this marvelous digital age that's letting us do like CouchCon right now. Um, so tools to communicate things out. Yeah, my recommendation, the two resources that I use, and this is not sponsored by them or anything else like that. Just throw that out there right now. I use World Anvil and I use Obsidian Portal. World Anvil is a world building tool set. It's effectively like a collection of prompts for building everything from land masses to political parties to cults to historical figures, all that sort of stuff. Monsters, ethnic groups, whole nine yards. It's a great tool. It's good for getting all your notes in one place. And Obsidian Portal is a wiki style site that basically lets you create a wiki for your world that you can either have be public or give your players access to. And so you can be like, hey, I didn't want to give you print out, 1,000 pieces of paper. I've created this site. Go check it out. And it puts those tools into the hands of your players so they can go out and they can check things out and do all that sort of thing. Got a question here. Do you have some type of document or handout that kind of has what you're going over? I think it'd be nice to have something to reference. Sort of. I've got two posts up on my blog right now about world building that I've drawn heavily from for this discussion. And I've also got I've been following the syllabus guide from my OrcaCon 2020 presentation, which doesn't really have um, a ton of information per se on it. It's more of a collection notes to discuss. Um, all right, I just got information from on high. So this is going to be up for two. This video is being saved here on Twitch and will be here for 2 weeks. And also, there's going to be um, transfer to YouTube after that. So this will be on YouTube forever until YouTube ceases to be. Um, After that, so the things I've discussed here will be available all over the place, and I am planning eventually on finishing the those world building posts on my blog, which should be of great assistance. And see how am I doing for time? Sweet, got 9 minutes left. All right, so yeah, use those two tools. Another resource that I like to draw on are pictures. Like go through the internet, find pictures, and show them to your players. A picture's worth 1,000 words. If you can find imagery that is accurate or similar to what you're discussing in your world and show that to your players, okay, it's like imagination fuel. It is fantastic. It is useful, and it will go the mile to help everything else. You could even do a visual guide if you wanted to. Go on Google Docs, throw some pictures on there, comments, all that sort of stuff. Save it as a PDF, share it out to your players. Then they're looking at it, they're saying, "Oh, sweet, now I've got this visual guide that's telling me, how things sort of look around the place that I'm at." And these are fantastic. I A good example of that is one that I actually made. I made up for our sporadic Street Fighter role playing game. My friends and I have been playing this game a few times a year when we're all together for a few years now. And I created a whole visual guide to it. And it's just for us. It's not, didn't make it publicly available because I don't own the rights to the pictures for it. But I was like, yeah, like here are the pictures. This is what this part of the world looks like. This looks like, and it is fantastic. And yeah, a comment here, World Anvil allows you to put pictures in articles too, if I'm not saying. Yeah, they absolutely do. And I'll do the copyright thing here and say that if you're putting pictures into your World Anvil, make sure that they're either like royalty free, like something from Pixabay or something like that, or make sure that you have the rights to it, especially if you're going to be making it public, um, or trying to like monetize it in any way, shape, or form, because we don't want to, you know, you don't want to screw over artists. It's not cool. But yes, you can absolutely add images to World Anvil. So we have slightly less than 6 minutes left. Are there any more questions, comments, queries, concerns? Is there any burning questions anybody has about world building or anything else like that that they want to get out right now? Here, open up the Twitch. I wish it would show if someone was typing, but it does not. All right, so this is fairly quiet, so I'm going to go into the end of stream. Oh, here we go. Rachel Iris Rings with something I forgot to mention earlier about cultures and cultures. There are also countercultures. Absolutely. There are countercultures, and countercultures are inherent to a lot of games. Some games even build their entire thing around them. Good examples are Cyberpunk, Shadowrun, what's it, Blades in the Dark, stuff like that. Any games like that drop you right into countercultures, and other games integrate them to one field or another. It's a very good point. I forgot to mention that, and thank you for bringing that up. That is fantastic. Ninja Wolf, 007. What is your favorite part of world building? My favorite part of world building is mapping and like making the map of the world, or the location or whatnot, and then figuring out what's in it and how it all sort of works together. It's a lot of it's a lot of fun. It's my favorite part. Another question here from Adesumbe: developing history of your world. Yes, writing histories is fun. The biggest thing that I would say on writing histories from world building perspective is avoid the 1,000 year trope. Okay, like there's a nasty habit in fantasy, especially, and then again in science fiction when we start getting into like the far future of thousands of years passing with no significant like cultural development or things like that. And it is, yeah, like if you start things like, oh, this knightly order has existed for thousands of years. Oh, welcome, Party RPG is rating with a party of 9. Yeah, welcome to the show. You guys are just in time to catch the end of it. Um, thanks for joining. Um, yeah, watch your time scales, especially if you're dealing with different groups, because different groups will have different time scales that they're operating on. And probably the other big thing is avoid the habit of apocalyptic level events being the reason why things always change in a world. Sometimes stuff just changes. You don't need to hit your world with a meteor. You don't have to um like have everything come apart at the seams and fix itself every so often. You don't need to have a ton of apocalypses. I mean, like, just to look like the real world history for a moment as an example. Humanity has effectively only really had two apocalypse sort of level events. One was 70 odd thousand years ago when all of a sudden a whole whack of us died, and they had to and our population had to rebuild from there. And the other one was the Bronze Age collapse, um, where these are like radical world changing events, and that's like two in 70 odd thousand years. So you don't need to have your world getting hit every few hundred years by craziness that just like levels everything out. So I've got 2 minutes here left. So I'm gonna let's see. Yeah, peace can cause big changes. Absolutely. Um, so less than 2 minutes left. So I'm going to go into my outro here. So I remind you, please donate to Doctors Without Borders. They are there's a link below in this stream. Um, Anything, dollar, $5, whatever you can give, please do. They are doing a lot of heavy lifting right now, medically, in places that do not have good infrastructure, and they need the help. They need the assistance. So hit that link. Next up, Virtual Vendor Hall. If you haven't been there yet, please go over to the Virtual Vendor Hall, check them out, buy something, help out our artists and creatives so that they can keep on doing what they do and don't have to go out and try to get horrible regular jobs that take away from their time to be awesome and creative. My name is Graham. I am POCGamer. Thank you very much for watching my stream on this crash course in world building. Have a great day, and I will see you later.